Thank you for coming out on this cold winter's day. And I'm Jane Vossler, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the Community Senior Center. I want to say a few thank yous first. Thank you to the program committee members for coming up with this idea. That's Peggy Curtis, Stevie Spalding, Kathleen Gent, Kathy Gruber, and myself. It's a departure from our usual programs. We've never had a panel discussion that I can remember in the last 10 years or so, and we've never dealt with an issue like this either, so we'll see how it goes. I want to thank Peggy Curtis. She and I invited the panelists. And I want to thank the panelists for showing up and being willing to talk to us today. So let me introduce them. Can I move this? This is Kathleen Weatherhog, who works for the Vermont Food Bank and is the Senior Manager of Community Engagements in Chittenden County. Kyle. And this is MJ Patchett, Director of the Richmond Food Shelf and Thrift Store. This is Marshall Paulson. Sorry, I'm not used to this. This is Marshall Paulson, who's one of the overseers of the Richmond Friday Food Affair. And this is Fran Thomas at the end. She has been running the Richmond Meals on Wheels for about 35 years. So she brings an interesting perspective to us today. So let me remind you that food insecurity, as defined by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is a lack of consistent access to enough food for an active, healthy lifestyle. And also will remind you of the startling statistic that 2 in 5 Vermonters are food insecure. There'll be 2 rounds of questions for the panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions and your thoughts on the matter. So the first question is, what do you, and maybe when you talk you could just remind us of your organization. So, what do you and your organization do to help those who are food insecure?
Hi everyone, my name's Kyle Weatherhog. I work for the Vermont Food Bank, and as you may know, the Vermont Food Bank is a statewide organization, and we are connected with Feeding America, which is a national organization. So we do receive funding from the federal programming, and we also receive funding from the state. So in terms of what does your organization do to help reduce food insecurity, we run various programs which help to increase food access. So I was just going to say we have 250-ish network partners, or about that number, across the state that we work with, again, to distribute food. So the Richmond Food Shelf is a partner of the food bank, and we are able to distribute food to them in various ways. And then there are also multiple programs that are run in various towns and through different programming. So I was just going to share a few of those programs that we work on to basically work on stability, utilization, availability, and access of food insecurity. Those are the 4 pillars of food insecurity. So one big piece, or like programs that we have is Vermonters Feeding Vermonters. This is a program where food shelves are able to apply for funding to basically make purchases at local farms, then to be able to distribute their food within their food shelf. We have a program called Veggie Van Go. It's a program where it's typically 3 to 4 items of food are brought to a location and then distributed to the community. So an example in this county is the Winooski School. The Winooski School will receive, again, 3 to 4 items, and then everyone in the school goes through the line and is able to receive food, and then certain, I believe it's twice a month that they have those. The community members are able also to go through that line. VT Fresh is a program through the Vermont Food Bank that addresses utilization of food. So they mainly make recipe cards. They also provide grants for basically how to use the food and how to make food and produce more appealing to folks in the food shelves. We also utilize the federal food programs such as TFAP, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, CSFP, for older adults, and then also for adults within certain income brackets. And we were just talking about emergency response. The food bank has been involved with a lot of the emergencies over the past few years, and especially with flooding, and to bring food to certain communities and water, such things. 3 Squares Vermont is another name for SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is the old term for food stamps. We have a program that helps to assist folks to access that program. Fresh Rescue is another program that we utilize, basically helps to reduce food waste from grocery stores or gas stations, so food shelves are able to connect with those locations and then are able to access a lot of food that typically on the outside of the grocery store, so think breads, bakery items, produce, even frozen meats and milk and dairy that have specific use-by dates that can go to be used at food shelves. I personally manage a gleaning program in Chittenden County, where that's basically to help reduce food waste and from the farm level. And then a few other things, just largely, the Vermont Food Bank is working a lot on culturally preferred foods, so working to make sure that the food shelves are able to provide food for the community that is dignified and relates to folks' culture and their backgrounds. Last few things, and I guess a big thing is advocacy. So the Vermont Food Bank also works with the state to help advocate for programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or 3 Squares Vermont, various programs that the restaurant meals program is something that basically would allow people with SNAP to access a restaurant meal, like a ready-made meal. And then in general, the food bank is requesting base funding from the state to help with all these programs. And in general, there's other federal programs as well to work on increasing access to general emergency responsive programs and various things. So that was a long list, but those are a few of the programs that the Vermont Food Bank has to increase food security. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. My name's MJ. I work at the Richmond Food Shelf and Thrift Store, which is just right up here on Bridge Street. If you haven't been by, come on in. We got great clothes to shop for. And if you're curious about the food shelf, even if you have been in the thrift store, we'd love to show you around, give you a little tour. We are probably one of the smallest, would you say, Kyle? Like in size, food shelves in the state. It's just a hallway. And as a food shelf, as opposed to like a food pantry, we serve fresh food, produce, dairy, like cottage cheese, yogurt, eggs, frozen meat, bread. We serve all those foods along with non-perishable foods. And so as a food shelf, what do we do to reduce food insecurity? Well, we do the direct work of giving people food. It's not a solution to the root cause of food insecurity, but it is like it's getting people's basic needs met. In 2024, the average number of visits we had per month was 78, and we probably served about 60 households, so some of those households would come twice a month. Right now, because of the numbers of folks coming in, we do limit that they can only come in twice a month. It's about $50 or $50 to $75 of groceries that they receive every visit, which is probably, 5 days of food, depending on how much folks eat and how many people are in the family. And we have a milk program where folks, it's very complicated to serve fresh milk. We don't have the space for that, so we have a little coupon that we give to folks. They can get 2 coupons each for 1 gallon of milk, and they use the coupon at the Richmond market. And we get the bill at the end of the month and pay for all the milk. So on average, it's around 80 gallons of milk every month that we are able to distribute. And we're grateful for that partnership. The majority of food that we distribute at the food shelf is purchased, probably 80 or 90% of the food. And most of that is purchased from the Richmond market, and then also we buy a lot of local produce from local farms. And right now we're getting our eggs from right here in Richmond at Far Farms. The remaining amount of food that we get is through the food bank, either purchased through their warehouse stuff. They are able to get kind of cheaper foods, or we get donated food from them. And then maybe like 5% of the food that we get is donated. That might be more right now because of the Super Bowl. We have a lot of soup, and it's really wonderful. We're very appreciative. And then other things that we do, since we're serving people directly, we're able to connect them to various services, including services at the food bank. So folks come in, if they're not already signed up for 3 Squares for SNAP, then we can connect them, have a much more personal connection with folks that work at the food bank that can help them, basically walk them through the application to get into 3 Squares. And then we do have a more awareness of kind of what's going on with folks. Do they need help finding a job? There's like various organizations we can connect them with. Basically, we're trying to look out for everybody, and we can't do everything, you know. I'm not a social worker, but we do what we can to help. What else? I think that's about it. Marshall?
You say that's about it, that's quite
For now, yeah. There's probably more, but.
Hi, I'm Marshall Paulson, and I'm here on behalf of Richmond's own Friday Food Affair, or Friday Food Affair at 5. And I heard the phrase earlier this afternoon that struck a chord to me of a niche program, and I think that Friday Food Affair would be considered one such outreach. Friday Food Affair is a community dinner that's held twice a month here in the Fellowship Hall of the Richmond Congregational Church. It was started in 2008 by 4 individuals who were responding to, at that time, a pretty rough economic situation that seemed to spur a real spike in people realizing food insecurity, if not for the first time, certainly an increase. And one of those founders of Friday Food Affair is here today, Jerry Carpenter, and it's because of his work that we still have this dinner that's been going on for a number of years. My wife Gretchen and I are currently, we like to say the overseers of Friday Food Affair, but really it's managed and run by a large group of community members who are very generous, donating their time, their effort, and their willingness to help cook, prepare, serve, and clean up from a meal twice a month. We have our meals on Friday evenings, and we average around 120 to 130 meals served each evening. This is a combination of folks who come in and sit down for dinner, and also folks who come and take takeout containers. And the attendance has been very steady and encouraging, and the response that we get from the community also seems to be very positive and encouraging. The mission of Friday Food Affair is twofold. First and foremost, to help address one opportunity for folks who are experiencing food insecurity to have a delicious, nutritious meal with no expectation or obligation of a fee or paying for the meal. Friday Food Affair does function on a donate what and if you can structure. Our goal is to be self-sustaining, and really due to all of the volunteers that help both with generously donating foods and definitely generously donating time and effort, we are able to be self-sustaining. And we're even in a position to periodically make a small financial donation, which we like to share with both the food shelf and also our host facility, the Richmond Congregational Church, to help support a little of their outreach mission for people as well. I mentioned two parts of the mission. The second part of the mission of Friday Food Affair is a community meal, a chance for people in our community to sit down together with whomever's at the table you're at and enjoy the company of others. And we see that at any time of year, many folks seem to find this is very nurturing and supportive and enjoy it, and particularly as we get in our colder weather, where we all tend to be a little more closed in. It's an opportunity to just be with others. I regret that Gretchen couldn't be here today, but she did ask me to pass along that she certainly holds the view from her work as a family counselor of families in need throughout the region that food insecurity is not just about the food, but it's also, call it food for the soul, interactions with other people, interactions with community members and other folks is also a very important part of nurturing and feeding. And that's the Friday Food Affair experience. Thank you.
Hey, my name's Fran Thomas. Most of you know me. And I have to correct Jane. I have been delivering Meals on Wheels for probably 35 or more years, ever since the program was started in Richmond. I've been in charge of the drivers. I schedule drivers, and I try and coordinate with Age Well, the Meals on Wheels program, for probably 15 years. So besides Meals on Wheels, I'm not really an official representative of Age Well, but besides the Meals on Wheels program, they do have the grab-and-go meals where you can pick them up, sign up and pick them up at the Congregational Church once or twice a month. They do have some meal sites that they work with as another, not here in Richmond, but as another way to reach out to people. As far as the Meals on Wheels program, I look at that food insecurity in another way, beside the fact that maybe people can't afford food and it does provide them the food. But there are also people that maybe can pay for food but can't get out to get it. And then there are people that are alone and, they don't have the motivation to cook a meal. So Meals on Wheels will provide them with a nutritious meal. 5 days a week. Some people, if they prefer, can also get frozen meals for the Saturday and Sunday. Besides that, there's the wellness check. Volunteers can sense if something's wrong. And we did have a volunteer once that realized that one of our clients was having a stroke and called rescue. And that was really important. And then the idea of a friendly visitor. We can't stay very long because we have people waiting for their meals. But just the fact you can go in and say hello, how are you doing, and maybe chat with someone. We used to have a woman who was since passed who we all put as the last person we delivered to because she was so wonderful to talk to, and we'd sometimes go in and sit down and chat with her, but mainly, a friendly visit. I think, it's just, we do deliver, if there's bad weather, the earlier in the year or a holiday, Age Well provides a meal, extra meals that people can freeze and have available. And most of our clients, if something happens, as far as I know, as far as what I've observed, have enough food to, survive for a day. And some of the homes, we have to be non-judgmental, because some of the homes you go into, you think, oh, I'd love to pick it up, but that's not our job. If we see somebody, when we're delivering meals, I occasionally have asked Age Well if they could have someone from Age Well visit a client and maybe assess their situation more. But it's mainly a nutritious meal, a well check, and a friendly visit.
So I think there's a lot of good work being done here by these people. The second question is, what do you think needs to be done to really greatly reduce food insecurity? It's been a problem for a long time, and it's ongoing. But what would it take, other than these people doing such great work, what would it take to really make a significant difference in the problem?
Great. Again, I'm Kyle from the Vermont Food Bank. And I would say some of this should be taken as, this is from the food bank, and some of it, could be just from my experience working in my role. But I would say, so as the food bank in general, there's a constant voice of saying we should be working ourselves out of a job. And so I think that is always the constant goal of the Vermont Food Bank. And yet this last year, or the last few years, I believe that we've distributed around 15 million pounds of food, not tons, 15 million pounds of food. And that's obviously a lot of food. And so some folks have, maybe I think MJ mentioned it once, but addressing the root causes of hunger, I think would make a really big dent in this problem. And that, not to again bore you with all of the main issues around that, but really in my mind it comes from housing access, and then even with housing, jobs. So Matthew Desmond wrote a great book. Of course, the name, anyone know? The Hunger in the U.S. Anyway, Matthew Desmond wrote a really great book. Apologies that I'm not remembering the name at the moment, but he talks a lot about how various housing sites were built, and many of them didn't do so well because there weren't adequate jobs being made simultaneously to basically withstay and abstain those folks who were living there. And also a lack of affordable and accessible health care is another big piece that I think is something that can be addressed in general. Again, another opinion of mine is that I think that we have a sick care system. We don't necessarily have a health care system, and that incentivizes medical professionals to keep patients healthy. I think we work a lot with basically addressing individual sicknesses instead of really addressing folks as humans as whole. And I think that all of that is overlaid with large issues of structural racism and sexism, classism, and other forms of systemic discrimination that really profoundly impact hunger. Obviously, Vermont is not a hugely diverse state. However, if you look at the numbers, there's also this, I'll tell this resource in a second, but by the populations, it is hugely, I would say, significant that people with multiple intersections of identity experience food security at higher rates. And so, again, it's completely related, I believe, to many systemic discriminations and issues around prejudice. And secondly, I think, or a few other things, policy and advocacy. So the Farm Bill is something that everyone can keep up with. It's a 5-year omnibus bill, so it's a bill that contains a whole slew of policy that related to conservation and food access as well. But these issues are big, and the federal government can help there, I think. I started to allude to it, but one thing that can help make a dent is our state and our communities. I recently listened to this awesome book by someone named Adrienne Marie Brown, who talks a lot about fractals. And if you know about fractals, an example would be a fern, and that every piece of the fern looks like the greater picture of the fern. And I think this person mentioned, if we want to see something happening in the Oval Office, we need to be able to do it in our own community to make sure that it can happen in that space. And so Vermont actually worked on this awesome, it's called Food Security Roadmap, and it's a roadmap to 2035 to basically eradicate food security. So this is a 10-year plan, and its three main areas are community-based councils, statewide food security coalitions within the Farm to Plate network, and activity in the Vermont Legislative Authority and offices of food security. So within those three realms, there's a lot of work, but again, bringing it back, I think there's a lot that can be done in the community. And we were just doing a site visit today at the Richmond Food Shelf, and it was a great example of a volunteer coming in who was not actually, they're just a volunteer, but they work at the UVM Medical Network, and when they realized that there was a need, they met that need they do home deliveries, and I think that's an great example of how community members can be engaged and work on food insecurity. And then I think my last thing that I wanted to say, or my notes that I wrote here, were really reduction of barriers for programs such as 3 Squares Vermont, the SNAP. The income eligibility can be really challenging for folks. So, for example, maybe there's a single parent who is working a job, and maybe they get an increase in pay, and that actually could take them off of the eligibility for these programs. And so it's like a great celebration for that person to have an increase of pay, but then it may actually come back to bite them. And so there's this really interesting cycle that happens around that, and I think that can be an interesting barrier. And not even to say, if you've ever looked at the application, it is very confusing. I speak English. I think it's confusing. And for folks who don't have access to, various other supports, I think it can be really challenging. So little things like that, like easing access and making programs easier. All right, one last thing. I think mutual aid is something that is really neat, and there's a lot of mutual aid that happens, and we can all maybe support that. I think is another awesome thing. So again, thanks for listening to my long list, but it's positive. I think we can work on it.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I a lot of what you shared also is what I would say is the Richmond Food Shelf, we can only do so much as this little nonprofit to address the root causes, because the root causes are really big, housing, and I would say the vast majority of folks that do come to the food shelf, if they're of working age, they are working, they have jobs, but they're not very good paying jobs. And there's, a lot of single parents that are working full time and even making a pretty good income. So they fall into this huge gap of what we call the benefits cliff, where you make a little bit too much to be eligible for 3 Squares, and then you get nothing. So it's impossible to make things work, especially if you have small children and you're maybe paying for daycare or finding a way to care for your kids during the day. And so it's really advocating for more support for folks with 3 Squares and affordable housing and better paying jobs, either by advocating in your own community, in your own town, or on a state level or on a federal level. I think all those things are good. And we're, at the food shelf, we're just here doing what we can to help people in the here and now. And I agree that the reason that our food shelf is able to exist and thrive is because of the support of so many of our community members. So continuing to support your local food shelf is also very helpful. I think that's it. Yeah.
I was just going to say, along those lines, I think that's a common misconception, or a common misconception is that the food bank gives a lot to all food shelves, and as much as that is true, there's a lot of food shelves, as MJ was saying, that spend a lot of money of their own to purchase food, and that is all based on community support. So that's one thing, again, I think too, is that this, of make that a misnomer, and we still need, all the food shelves still need community support to basically continue working.
Yeah, the food bank is very supportive of what we're doing, but it's a separate entity, and we're functioning on our own. Each food shelf is its own separate nonprofit. So.
Speaking specifically of the Friday food affair and a community dinner, the question is, what can we do to help address food insecurity? One thing I see as I look in this room, there are a number of folks here that have are volunteers at the Friday food affair. And one thing that we can all do, and this is my shameless plug moment, to volunteer for Friday food affair and join the fun in helping assist in making a meal. FridayFoodAffair.org, and you can go to my favorite page, the volunteer tab, and volunteer. But I'm really speaking to the choir because so many people here in this room have done that, and thank you for that. The question of food insecurity and how something like a community meal can assist with that really is a question that I ponder, and I've heard the phrase already, but it's a phrase that I use, which is, what can we do as a community in offering a community meal to reduce the barriers to people feeling comfortable to just come on in and have a meal? We don't know at the Friday Food Affair all the folks that walk in the door. We don't know who is really experiencing food insecurity. I think I would be surprised by the number of people, but I really don't know. It's not something any of us advertise, particularly in our own condition. And yet, I have the opinion that we are increasing the folks who perhaps may have food insecurity. The numbers may be increasing coming to this one particular dinner. I'm hopeful that it is. But really, as much as anything, I have a question for all of us, is what can we do as a facilitator of a community meal to help reduce those barriers? I know we've had a nice casual partnership with the thrift store in doing little coupons for folks and what have you. But any idea that you may have, or others, that we could institute to just reduce those roadblocks would be helpful. Thank you.
I'm not sure there's much I can add to what's already been said, but back to Meals on Wheels, there's no income requirement, and Meals on Wheels really is for seniors, I think 60 and over. Occasionally we've had clients that are younger and are recovering from serious surgery and have no way to get a balanced meal. So what I try to do is, on the Front Porch Forum, every once in a while, I get something from Age Well, a post, and I repost it to the Front Porch Forum to make people aware that there is this program. I mean, our drivers, I have over 20 drivers that are willing to deliver Meals on Wheels. Now, some of them are gone to warmer weather for the winter, and some of them, us, would wish for better road conditions now and then. But the drivers love to deliver Meals on Wheels. We have met some really interesting people, and they're all different. So what I try to do is make people aware that there is this program that can serve seniors, and for whatever their reason for food insecurity is, and lots of times it's not finance. Age Well does send sort of an invoice or an accounting of how many meals they've had at the end of the month. But they don't, if you don't send anything in, they don't come back to you, as far as I know, asking for a donation. So the more we can let people know what services are available, either Meals on Wheels, the food shelf, the Friday food affair, the better off we'll be. And it's important. We are in a turbulent time, and we have no idea if the funding that Age Well gets and the food shelf from the government, are those going to disappear? So however we can advocate, we need to. Thank you.
So, as you think about this and listen to these ideas, what do you think? If you can ask them questions about what they do or what they think, or you can just share with us some of your ideas of what you think needs to be done. Over there.
A couple of questions. One, I'm unclear. I live in Bolton, and I'm unclear if your group serves Bolton. I'm assuming Meals on Wheels does, but I don't know if you're responsible for Bolton.
No, we used to deliver to the mobile home park when we first started, but I think Waterbury took that over.
Yeah, so the question is, do we serve Bolton, and probably assuming, do we serve other neighboring towns? The Richmond Food Shelf is the only food shelf around for Richmond, Huntington, and Bolton. And for many years, we did limit ourselves to residents of those three towns. After COVID, or during COVID, it was before I worked there, we did open it up so that anybody that walks through the door that needs food will get food. And that's for many reasons, to increase access. I think there's a ton of reasons that folks may not want to go to the food shelf in the town that they live, especially in these tiny little Vermont towns, and there's a lot of stigma around who sees you at the food shelf and all that kind of stuff. So we're happy to serve anybody that comes in. I would say that the majority of folks are from Richmond, Huntington, and Bolton, and just a handful of folks come from other parts of the state.
And then my second question, sorry, and then I'll stop talking. Do you have a backup plan for if funding gets eliminated?
So that question is, do you have a backup plan if funding gets eliminated? For the food shelf, we don't directly receive any federal funding. We don't receive any funding from the town. We do receive grants, like from the food bank, for specific programs. I have no idea if that's federally funded. But the vast majority of how we survive is from individual contributions from many of the people in this room and many more, like in the community.
The Vermont Food Bank is definitely thinking about this and is walking, I think, slowly amongst the news and the barrage of information that's coming. And the food bank in our budget has always had a fund that is able to be basically looked back on and utilized. However, there are an immense amount of programs. So the SNAP program is federally funded, TFAP, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program for older adults, and WIC, so the Women, Infants, and Children, are all federal programs. And that, again, that's a huge impact that we're definitely concerned about, that will have a large impact on food access in the state. And so in terms of planning, I think at the moment we're trying to take information in slowly and, or I guess not slowly, but we're trying to not be super reactive and just being really thoughtful and intentional about how we move through this. And, but yes, there's not necessarily going to be, I don't think, a program that the Vermont Food Bank will roll out that would that would basically mimic those federal programs. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's still a little bit unknown.
I think, yeah, the concern is not, for us at the food shelf, is not a lack of funding, but a stark increase in need and an increase in spending, right? And maybe who knows about the funding, but and we would be okay with increasing who we serve, and but we just kind of got to take things as they come, and it's possible, you know, we may need to put more limits on what we hand out or how many people we serve and things like that. But at this time, we don't have to do that.
What might be helpful if some of you who have really been exposed to people who seemingly are hungry, that you personalize a story, excuse me, not telling names or locations or anything, but it could motivate people to take action or contribute in some way. If you know, if you hear about the suffering, the hunger that is out there, and it's, you know, it's wonderful to hear what everybody is doing. You folks are wonderful, but to put a face on it without, you know, does that make sense?
So are you asking if we could tell a story from experiences? So, yeah, I want to be careful about like sharing stories about, obviously it would be anonymous, and I think there are some people that volunteer at the food shelf very regularly in this room that could also have stories to share. And I think an important thing about storytelling is that it should really come from the person that has experienced that hunger or has experienced the food insecurity, and you want to have permission around telling stories before sharing those stories. So I think that is something that the Richmond Food Shelf is like, we are preparing to kind of collect more testimonials and like stories to be shared in a way to kind of share what's going on at the food shelf more. I don't necessarily have like a really specific story on the tip of my tongue that I would feel safe sharing publicly at this moment. I guess I'll say that I've seen many folks come in, especially the first time, they're very tentative and shy, maybe like waiting for other food. We can only serve one food shelf family at a time because it's such a small space. So maybe they like wait till everybody else is done, and they'll come in and you know, they have all these questions, or they're worried that they won't get food, and then we give them food. And then sometimes for new folks, sometimes we'll have like a gift card to Hannaford or something, and then the tears just start coming down. They're like so shocked to be so, they feel all this support that they like really needed and have been neglected, you know. So it's really special to be a part of that work. But I think you're totally right. Stories are very powerful, and I guess I'll say that I'm working on it.
One thing that made a big impression on me while working there, when someone told me they had little children, they had a job, a single parent, I believe, I don't remember all the details, except that she had just had to have, in order to get to work, she had to have her car fixed, and it cost like $1,000. She said, that's it. That's, you know, all of a sudden I have to pay for this car. And that's the other thing about living in Vermont, you know, you have to have a car. And those cars are expensive. And you have kids that you have to feed. And yeah, I found that really made a big impression on me.
If I could just take a moment, I was meeting with someone the other day who has been in Burlington, who has been an advocate for families and children in the court system. And she was speaking of a program that was developed at a university in the upper Midwest called the Poverty Project. And this is a kit that they developed that organizations can buy that is an opportunity for take a room about this size, take a group of about this number of people, and go through the steps of trying to understand what the experience of being financially and otherwise at risk, food, housing, transportation, medical care, schools. And she described this experience. It's like a 2 or 3 hour game. You get so many chits, you get so much money, you have to pay for your car repair, but you have, to do that, you now have used all your bus tokens, so now your kids can't go to school or to the doctor. And you can see where this kind of is going, but when you speak to someone who is one car repair away from really falling off the edge, it was interesting to hear there is an organization that created a tool, a kit, for all of us to really in real time experience. One last thought, this woman told me, and she's an educated college woman, and she said it was so striking that at one point in her experience in this game, not long into it, she determined that she was going to steal from her neighbors to try and feed her kids. And it struck her that within a matter of an hour or two of role-playing a game, that she arrived at that realization, that's what she would do. And I think about that when we hear about the numbers of cars being stolen, and understanding from some of our law enforcement that's just people need a place to sleep in the winter. A very complex issue all the way around.
Well, an open-ended question really about school meal programs. Opinions about the panelists about what's good about them and what might be improved in school meals.
Well, in terms of advocacy, right now the governor is interested in removing the free school lunches. So that's something that you should take note of, or that you can take note of. Before I was working at the Vermont Food Bank, I was doing farm-to-school work, and then in very small time was working at a middle school. So I have seen very firsthand the school meal situation, and I think for many of the schools, it depends on the school and the director that's in charge. And so the school district that I was working in, they did a lot of awesome, local meals. And so some of the school meals were quite awesome, actually. And I do know that the free school meals is, in my opinion, I would say, is like an amazing program, because again, talking about stigma, it does reduce the stigma of having to go through the line and basically, there's no separation between people who have free and reduced lunch. And basically, I think it's something that helps everyone. So even if a parent is able to purchase their child's meal every day, I think there's an added benefit to that community in terms of what that parent could then spend their money on, or how they could support the school. And so I think I've heard from both sides that from folks who, again, maybe wouldn't need the benefit and who benefit, but then also the folks that do receive the free lunch, that it's incredibly helpful. Just to share, I know someone in our email communications had mentioned the backpack program, which basically is a way that children are able to leave school with basically food on the weekend. And that program, unfortunately, is sunsetting this year for the Vermont Food Bank. And recently I heard a few quotes that from a few students, from coworkers, that were just saying, thanking their teachers so much for that food, that they, wouldn't go hungry for the weekend, or that, it's serious in terms of that over the weekend children definitely struggle to get the food that they need. So does that answer, or the question was around the school lunch program? Anyone?
Just a quick thing to add about the universal school meals. I did hear a number that the cost to the average taxpayer is $30 a year for universal school meals. So call the State House.
Increased use during school vacations?
The question is, does the food shelf see increased use during school vacations? I don't have that number here, but my feeling is usually no, not usually, because folks with kids are coming on their regular rotation or on a regular basis anyways, I think. That's a good question, though. Or maybe they're doing something else for vacation.
If you had extra space, would the food shelf be apt to expand?
If we had extra space, would we expand? Sure. You got space? There's no plan in the works. I think it would be great to have a space that felt more like shopping at a market, or a more kind of normalized shopping experience rather than going to the back of the thrift store. Though a nice benefit about our space is that it's not just dedicated as a food shelf. It's a public space where anyone, many of us go to shop. So it's, you walk into the thrift store, it doesn't mean that you're the poor person going to the food shelf. So it's, I think that is a nice reduced barrier in that way. But no plans right now.
I'm trying to pick one. I'll go to my original one, not the school lunch one, which is especially for the Meals on Wheels, but other programs maybe providing prepared food or food for people with chronic health conditions. Who's preparing it? And does Vermont, because I'm not from here, I'm visiting my dad, I'm from DC, which, by the way, I don't have a rep. Call your people in Congress, because those of us who actually live there can't, there's no one to call. But also wondering, DC has a couple of programs now that are like food is medicine, where doctors can actually write prescriptions, and there's certain grocery stores where people can go get them filled, and it's a benefit. And I just forgot what the other thing I was going to say about. And I have a friend who runs a program that's kind of like Meals on Wheels, but it's called Food for Friends, and it actually specifically delivers medically tailored meals, which I know Meals on Wheels can't do. But does Vermont have anything that's addressing health around food with programs like that? But also, who's preparing your food? Where is your food coming from? Who's paying for it? All those good questions.
Well, I'll give you a quick history of Meals on Wheels in Richmond. When Meals on Wheels was first started, we had the bakery Betsy bought, and she prepared the meals, or her employees did. Unfortunately, those meals were good, but they didn't really satisfy their clientele. Those were mostly vegetarian soups. So then the meals were then prepared by the cooks up at Campbell's Hump. And so I'm assuming that it was the meal that the kids were getting that day. Then they were prepared by the kitchen over, there's a meal site in Waterbury, or there was, I'm not sure it's still there, and a gentleman would bring them over. Then we went to the Richmond Cafe, Marvin Carpenter's, and it was hard for him to prepare different meals than what was on his menu. Then there was in St. James Church in Essex Junction, there was a group there. They had a hired cook that prepared meals for Essex Junction. So Age Well moved us over there, and those meals, to tell you the truth, were the best. They were different, and I could bring my bushel of apples or 2 bushels of tomatoes, and they would use them. But then with government cuts, Age Well had to, there were kitchen, Burlington kitchen, and Rutland kitchen, like in Middlebury. Age Well had to combine all those, and they went out to bid. So the meals now are prepared, and I can't remember the company's name, in Rutland. And where they used to, when they came from Essex, they were hot, and we had a special cooler that kept them hot. Now they're frozen, and they're in a container that can be microwaved, and Age Well has made sure that any clients that get the meals, that they have a microwave so that they can warm them up. And we have a newer client, and he told me on one winter day when I almost got stuck in his driveway that he really appreciated the meals and that they were really good. So the kitchen in Rutland there were some initial complaints, but they have improved the meals, and I have not really heard too much about, oh, there's always just green beans or whatever. But they are frozen. So the government or Age Well is paying for those, and the clients, as I mentioned before, do get sort of an invoice, but nobody follows up on it. Oh, you didn't send anything in.
In regards to your question around food as medicine and the sort of veggie RX, Richmond, the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, right down the road, does a healthcare share that's been going on since 2012, which basically is a program that connects folks with basically a CSA or a farm share for folks either experiencing food insecurity or they have a diet-related disease or illness. I used to work there, so that's why I kind of have that. So the healthcare share primarily serves various areas. UVM was a first initial partner. CVMC, which is the Central Vermont Medical Center. There's now, which I may not, you can look at their website, but I'm pretty sure Plainfield is another site, and then there's also, drop off here, exactly, the Richmond Family Medical Center, excuse me, yep. And then also, I believe, I just saw this, that they've been able to extend the healthcare share for the Veterans, I always forget the Association, it's administration, and it might be in the northern Vermont. But again, check my facts there. But VYCC, Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, right down the road, does a healthcare share, along with an organization in Franklin County, and I'm going to mess up their name. I should know it. Apologize. And also Addison County, Acorn is another. There's a food hub that they do a similar program, and also Rutland does have. It's called the Pharmacy. So yeah, the few programs like that. I don't know of any of them that do specifically tailored meals for diet-related, unique things. But that sounds really neat.
Options. How are they informed? What's the net? Is there a network or is there a...
How do people find a food shelf? They can go to if I know there's many different ways to find different food shelves and meal sites. On the Vermont Food Bank website, they have like a whole food finder map. Even if you just type into Google Maps food shelf, like Richmond food shelf will pop up. And then we do try to reach out to folks on Front Porch Forum, and we have a website, and we have an Instagram, all that kind of thing. And then if people call 211, if they need help for whatever, and they say they need food and they live in this area, 211 will refer them to us. So there's a lot of different avenues.
Yeah, I was also going to say a lot of the social. So again, this person who is a volunteer works at UVM, and they're in the social area space. There are community action networks. So there are one in southern Vermont, one in Rutland, one in Brattleboro, one in the Northeast Kingdom and in the Newport area. And one in Barrie and one in Burlington, and they are state, actually I think federally funded as well, so that's also another point of question in terms of funding. But those are, a lot of those places are wraparound. They have a lot of social services, and most of those locations, I think all except for one, have a food pantry associated with it. So I would say, actually, in terms of sharing a story, this person did share, and you can see their story actually online from the State House a few weeks ago. They did some advocacy, so I don't think I would be overstepping. But this person was experiencing homelessness and was able to access one of these community action places, so Capstone and Barry. And they were able to receive many services where they were able to find housing, and then, again, food is all in that one place. So there are a decent amount of social services that are linking folks to food. And I would echo 211, I think, is a really great way that people can learn more. And then our website, and then I think word of mouth. This person shared, the person I was just sharing their story, they were really excited about being able to share their experience and be able to share with others the resources, because again, I think when they know that they've experienced such hardships, that they want others to be able to, find a way and find, again, some hope in their struggles. So I think, word of mouth is a really great way of the information spreading, especially within populations that are newer to the state. There's a lot of migrant community that I think a lot of the information is spread amongst the communication wavelengths, as well as again other groups of resettled folks that are here. So again, word of mouth I think is a big one, and then along with those other resources.
If I could just add a thought regarding the Friday Food Affair type of dinner and outreach and making people aware of it. It's an interesting balance of the capacity of Friday Food Affair to, in fact, have enough volunteers and food to prepare meals with the numbers of folks that come. We don't want to turn anyone away, and we never have. We sometimes go into our what we call Plan B meal if we run a little light on food. But we have a Plan B. I think a question came up about serving the community. Friday Food Affair in Richmond has been perhaps somewhat historically Richmond-centric, thinking to serve our own direct community. But everyone is welcome, and we do have folks from outside of our community, Bolton, Huntington, and even farther that I'm aware that do come for dinners. And we encourage everyone and anyone to come. Just as long as our wonderful team can keep the meals serving, everyone's welcome. Just a few dinners ago, we reached a milestone at Friday Food Affair. We served our 20,000th dinner on Friday Food Affair, which is really pretty remarkable. And we're now gunning for our next 20,000 dinners. And one last note, we're having dinner tomorrow night at 5 o'clock in the fellowship hall at the church. It's going to be a terrific dinner, so please come on down.
Can I just add one thing about when Peggy mentioned cars? That is one of a reason why a lot of people can't get a job or can't get to a grocery store. So I know that Good News Garage takes donated cars and then fixes them up and donates them to people in need. There's, I think, Habitat for Humanity. There's some other agencies that take them, but I think they sell them. So, I'm not sure that the cars that they get donated go then back to people in need. So I would encourage you to, support Good News Garage. And then the other thing I think we could do as a community would be maybe to create a pamphlet that talks about some of the available programs and have it at the Friday Food Fair, have it at voting day, so that people can pick it up. And there may be people that, there are a lot of people that don't have computers, aren't on Friday, the front porch forum all the time, that, to make more people aware of the opportunities that are available in Richmond and in the state.
To donate to the food shelf, are there certain things that you like, or do you prefer money, or what's the best way as a community member to give to the food shelf?
So the question is, what is the best thing to donate to the food shelf. And what? Other than soup. We have enough soup for now, thank you. It's really wonderful. The soup is great because it's very expensive to buy. And we probably have enough now to definitely get us through the winter, which is really, people really appreciate a nice can of soup. I do, if you're doing like a food drive, I do have like a kind of PDF I could send you with things that we could always use. In general, if it's going to be like non-perishables, like things that are really high protein are great because they're usually more expensive to buy, like tuna. And then also, if you're on SNAP or 3 Squares, you can only buy food with that. You can't buy toilet paper, dish soap, house cleaners, paper towels, all that stuff. And we don't really buy that at the food shelf, so that kind of stuff is always really helpful. Same thing for any personal hygiene products like pads and tampons and stuff. We do get soaps donated from Twin Craft. So we have that kind of thing. And then money is really the best way to support the food shelf because we can use it where it's most needed and direct the money to buying fresh food, which is really what people want when they come to the food shelf. If you think about what you want when you go to the grocery store, you probably don't want like a can of peas and a can of chili, or you want meat, eggs, dairy, and like a lot of good fresh produce, and that's what most of our families want. So it's really hard to donate that stuff. So supporting us financially is really a really nice way to help folks get the healthiest food and the food that they want.
I just wanted to put in a plug for a movie and a book. The movie is Bess O'Brien's most recent movie called Just Getting By, which is about food insecurity and also housing issues that people deal with. And the book is Gather by Kenneth Cotto. It's the Vermont Reads book this year. There are a whole bunch of copies of it in one floor below me. And it definitely touches on the theme of food insecurity, along with a number of other topics that are pretty timely in Vermont these days, with people dealing with food insecurity. So if anybody's not aware of both of those things, it's a good book and an interesting movie.
So if anyone didn't hear that, Bess O'Brien produced a documentary called Just Getting By, and you said it's also a book? No. Oh, yeah, okay. Yes. Gather by Gwyneth Cato? Kenneth Gatto. Gatto. That's a Vermont Reads book.
Yes, it's the Vermont Reads book this year. The book was one of 5 finalists for the National Book Award. It's a young adult book, but every adult I've loaned it to read has loved it. So it appeals to people of all ages, and it's a really good book.
While we're on that train, I did remember the book that I was talking about, which is Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond, and he also writes another book about housing. I think specifically it's called Evicted. So very good book if you want to get fired up about what you can do.
Couple things. First, I believe the Vermont Food Bank gets a 4-star for its rating as a good group to donate to. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I believe. And has the pantry and places like that advised people that there's smart ways to spend their limited amount of money and direct them away from McDonald's and things like that, and have good diets of beans and things like that that are healthy for them?
That's a great question. And the question is, does the or the food bank or any other pantry, I think anyone, provide suggestions basically for foods to eat? And the answer to that is really no. The Vermont Food Bank in general really believes in dignity, and just like someone else may not want someone to tell them what they should be doing, I think is a really big point that specifically SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, basically you're able to access any food in a grocery store except for alcohol, a cigarette, things like, and not prepared foods. But I think we prefer not to get into that space because we believe that I think folks know what they need at that time, and for many people, a meal at McDonald's might be the best way to spend a few dollars to get a meal for their family. Or again, there's various ways that people not just maybe experiencing food insecurity, or like poverty in the way of money, but many people experience time poverty as well. So the ability to actually make a meal is maybe something that folks, again, don't have the time, as Fran was saying. If someone's working a job and then, someone has to make the food at home when you get there, et cetera. So I think the faster answer is no, and the food bank tries to provide many different items. So even items such as a cake, and someone might say, oh well, someone shouldn't be able to receive a cake from a food shelf. But thinking of dignity, think about a family who a child might be experiencing a birthday, and because of the food shelf that they're able to go to, they're able to have a cake at their child's birthday. Whereas if they didn't maybe have that might not be an option. And again, think of the emotional challenge that child might go through. I couldn't have a cake for my birthday. And I think that's one small example of where it's maybe a little bit easier to have empathy in that situation. That's how I would maybe answer it for now.
Yeah, everybody deserves treats, right? Like, we all strive to have a healthy, nourishing diet, but we also, I think many of us probably enjoy something from Sweet Simone's every now and then, and so everyone deserves that. And like at the food shelf for us, right now we don't spend our money on purchasing, sugary processed foods, but we totally welcome it donated. We get not a lot, but a handful of items donated from the food bank, like from a grocery store, that are like more snacky kind of stuff. So we don't limit what we give out to folks. What else was I going to say? Oh, there is a federal program through the food bank called Vermont Fresh, which is all about promoting the consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables. So we do get grant money to beautify how the produce is presented in the food shelf, or make recipe cards so that folks know how to use these, radishes or whatever vegetables they might not be familiar with. So there is promotion of fruits and vegetables, for sure.
Yeah, and even just to add, I think that could be a common thought. And also, I just heard from MJ today that fresh produce is often what people are wanting the most, and that's actually aligned with a lot of other food shelves that people are really wanting to make things from scratch, especially from other cultures. And so actually the canned produce is really not serving them very well, and they would prefer the dry beans or the rice. And so it really, all depends on the population. So I think we try not to dictate any of those choices for folks.
This is really interesting, fascinating to listen to you all, because so many topics have come up that are interrelated, and food was the starting point for the discussion that you brought up. All these other essentially essential necessities of life, there's housing, there's food, there's transportation, and this time of year there's heating fuel, and so when people are challenged on any of those or all of those, food is one part of the problem. And mouth is the other one that came up. So all of these things are very expensive, and people are having to make choices between them, we hear.
One thing about the epidemic of obesity in this country and the world is because there's generations of poverty, of people going back hundreds and hundreds of years who have genetically become more efficient in preserving calories. So if you have a wealthier history, you're much more inefficient about your calories than if you were, it's like indigenous people, they tend towards diabetes and being overweight because they were just, hand to mouth kind of thing, hunter-gatherers. So it's a complicated story about obesity.
Sure. Just a few things there. I was actually just thinking that historically, I always thought that folks like in the sort of regal area, or like king and queen, actually saw it to be better to be holding more weight, because that showed that you were able to eat food and you were able to indulge. And then the second part that you mentioned about indigenous cultures, I think that actually is also somewhat maybe a misnomer in that there's a lot of food sovereignty issues, so the ability to choose what you're eating, and also just food justice in that, wrapped all in that. So, for example, not to get into the politics necessarily of it, but when folks were told where to live on reservations, the United States, through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, offers food access or food support, and those food supports were not necessarily items, to get back to the health area, very good options for folks. And another, book or something, to consider, Robin Wall Kimmerer is a really amazing author that might share a little bit more about that. But, there's a lot of basically ways in which people were not able to grow and eat the foods that they had traditionally eaten, and so folks having to turn to other food items such as fried bread. There's also a really great children's book, I believe it's just called Fry Bread. Anyone? Yeah. But that's a really an example of how a food, because flour and maybe some butter or just flour was accessible to folks, that this fried food was something that people could make. And so I would argue that it's not actually necessarily the genetics of those, like those diabetes and those other challenges, that it's more of an issue around what those folks have been able and have been able to access over time. I also, the food bank just had a internal learning opportunity where we were talking a lot about anti-fat bias and the word obesity, and that's something, again, culturally, there's another book, if you kind of look up those, the words, I could find it for you if I looked at my phone on my Libby account, but also obesity and all of those things are deeply racist as well, and stemming, even just the term BMI came from a very small portion of men who, came to, and their weights and heights and all that were put together, and that is what is the basis for our, looking at our population. So that's a very small group of people to base something off of. And so, again, I think digging in a little deeper on some of these topics, we might find that our previous ideas might be a little bit, coming from something else. But again, all those issues I think are really based in justice or discrimination and lack of sovereignty around what people are able to make for themselves. I don't know if anyone else wants that.
I agree.
I could ask another one. One of my favorite, I have an MSW, so to say that I'm a social worker, so I spent a lot of time looking at a lot of things, although food insecurity isn't my super focus, but one of my favorite things is multi-solving, and that's where you manage to solve more than one problem with a single program, such as jobs, job availability, job training, so job training, or farming, or any of those things. I'm just curious if any of that's implemented in DC. One of the famous ones in DC is DC Central Kitchen. It's actually expanded. It used to be specifically for people who had maybe interacted with the legal system or dealt with addiction, and they would come in there as a way to get training, and they would make food that was used at some of the various places for feeding people with food insecurity, but now they've expanded to some other groups, like maybe high school graduates who really aren't in college or GED or any of that, and they've even opened like catering facilities. So I literally gotten plates of food from that organization for, little events. And I just wondered if any of the food programs, sorry, this is mostly for you, Carol, any of the food programs in DC are like doing that kind of multi-solving. That's one of the reasons I asked who was cooking the food, right?
Yes, so in Vermont, the question is anyone kind of doing kind of multi-solving work where basically kind of doing job training at the same time? Sure. Yeah. So there used to be there was a program, and I'm pretty sure it left Burlington. There used to be a program in that community action organization, but it's called Community Kitchen Academy. So CKA is basically is one of those operations that brings folks in for about 8 weeks to learn the kitchen, basically learn how to do some prep work, learn how to basically have some of those jobs and transferable skills. They also do a serve safe training, so that means that they're able to take on different roles maybe in a kitchen, and then after that they graduate and are able to maybe go on to different jobs, again, that they wouldn't have had access to before. As my understanding at the moment, that's the most of what the Vermont Food Bank is doing in terms of all of that. But again, those community action networks or agencies, are, I would say, involved more with job training and more of those like multi-solving type projects. And I don't know other examples right now in Vermont that are specifically, I think the DC Central Kitchens, I don't know about other examples similar to that in Vermont, but definitely applaud those. Those are great. Yeah, but involving the community, basically, maybe the Friday night food fair could be a great way for folks to come in and learn some things about cooking.
It's now called Feeding Champlain Valley.
Yeah.
Didn't they used to do that?
Yeah, that's the Community Kitchen Academy.
So they don't do that anymore?
It's no longer, they still do serve meals, but they no longer are using that Community Kitchen Academy program. And I don't actually know the reason why, or like specifics. I think the volume and turnover is tough, and I could get back or go into my email and look at the exact details, but it still exists in Barrie, I believe.
One of the aspects of Friday Food Affair that I find so rewarding is when folks work together to prepare a meal. It really is a lot of fun. And it's so heartening to see, frequently we have young folks, however they end up there, mom drug them over, or after school, or there's actually a group at our own high school that are active in outreach. And other resources, but particularly the young folks that come in and help prepare a meal. And my observation is they're learning a lot about how to work together for a common goal. And what I observe is they find themselves having a really good time doing it. And it's just very heartening to think that there is generations coming up that appreciate the aspect of what volunteering can do to help them, and as well as helping the greater world. And they learn how to cook, too. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming. Let's have a nice round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.